What are we to make of Chujin Ketsukane? Undertale Yellow tells a story about Undertale's seventh fallen human, Clover, and there are many important people, problems and questions that emerge throughout their journey. But this particular question seems to me more important than most. It's a question that I believe that we players need to ask ourselves if we are to understand what the game is trying to say. After all, throughout the story the characters spend rather a lot of time asking the same thing. What are we to make of Chujin Ketsukane? Well, there are the obvious things. Chujin Ketsukane was an engineer in the steamworks, the husband of Soroba and the father of Kanako. He taught tinkering to Martlet, a scatterbrained royal guard from Snowdon, and made Axis, a robot who tries to capture Clover throughout the steamworks. Though we never meet him in-game, we learn quite a lot about him from many characters who did know him, especially Soroba. Eventually, it is revealed that he died because of an experiment necessitating a human soul, which he then left to Soroba in hopes that it would save monsterkind. Of course, it's all very well and good to establish this, and it's perhaps a necessary refresher for those whose memory is a bit rusty, but what does it all mean? When we consider the man behind all this, what are we supposed to feel? When we look at Undertale Yellow, how are we to understand his contribution? These may seem like obvious questions, but I think they're ones we as players need to ask ourselves again. Because as I've replayed the game and seen what it has to say, and then seen what others who have played the game have to say, I've come to realise that the answers that are often given by its players are not the same as the answers that Undertale Yellow actually gives. I believe that there are three main misinterpretations that people have when it comes to Chujin. They either try to demonise him, to exonerate him, or most often they simply neglect him entirely. Given that Chujin doesn't make an appearance in the flesh, that last one is perhaps understandable, but his absence doesn't make him any less important. Every major character Clover comes across in their journey has been in some way affected by Chujin. He is a large part of the context for the entire narrative, and yet most reviews and discussions of this game that I've seen don't appear to have realised it. As for making Chujin out to be utterly evil or else completely innocent, these are caricatures that betray the depth of his character and the narrative of the game itself. Therefore, we as players need to reconsider Chujin. Today, I want to propose a new understanding, one which does justice to his personality, his moral complexity, and his importance to the story. Think of it as a portrait of Chujin Ketsukane. I've given it that title because there are many different approaches we could take, but I hope that the portrait I create is both accurate to the text and, just perhaps, gives its viewer a new appreciation for him and for Undertale Yellow. So then, what does the game want us to make of Chujin Ketsukane? Well, the first, absolutely crucial thing that it wants to make clear is that Chujin was caring. Caring is Chujin's most defining character trait. It's what he's best remembered for amongst those who knew him. It's also the first thing that Clover ever explicitly hears about him during their stop at Honeydew Resort. There, they find a cozy heater crafted with love by Chujin and Martlet, and hear from the shopkeeper there how the warmth from that heater reminds her of how welcoming Chujin was. This first impression that we get is not an outlier, never to be repeated, but is conveyed to us over and over throughout the entire game by a substantial array of characters. Nearly everyone who has anything to say about Chujin says that he was kind. An example may be useful. Dalv is a vampire-like monster whom Clover encounters in the Dark Ruins. Long ago he used to live in Snowdon, where, one day, he was attacked by the sixth human, Integrity, while with Chujin's daughter, Kanako. This event was deeply traumatic for the reclusive Dalv, but one thing helped him with the pain: the gifts of corn from Sunnyside Farm left regularly on his doorstep by Chujin. Though he never knew Chujin personally, Dalv developed a connection with his mysterious benefactor, his friend, who helped him to cope with the past. It was when the corn stopped one day that Dalv became so disheartened that he chose to hide himself away in the ruins, living in seclusion and committed to being alone. But in all of that, he never forgot his only long-lost friend, who showed kindness when no one else did. Dalv's story isn't all that well known, mostly because it's told in riddles and vague hints, but it's very illuminating once we understand it. It not only demonstrates how Chujin's influence can be felt all over the narrative of Undertale Yellow, but also attests to the manner in which this influence was always one of kindness. Even in this small way, Chujin cared for Dalv, and that little bit of kindness made such a large impact for the better in his life. Someone with whom Chujin had a more personal relationship is Martlet, his apprentice to whom he taught tinkering. This wasn't something he did for a cost, by the way, but simply for the sake of kindness. Martlet's recollections of Chujin, whenever she mentions him, are overwhelmingly positive. Before meeting Chujin, she had no idea what she was to do with herself, but Chujin took her wings under his wing and gave her something to do. And, of course, he was really nice. In Martlet's flashback, we get insight into the close friendship that existed between them. Chujin was somebody who Martlet had a great deal of respect for and trust in, and he, in turn, enjoyed her company and wanted the best for her. So significant was his kindness that she describes him as being like a father to her, and wonders where she'd even be in life if it weren't for him. Again, I must stress, these examples aren't the exception but the rule. It's clear that Chujin was just a kind person to everyone. He was friends with many people, such as Starlo's parents, Solomon and Christina, who used to give him baskets full of corn every other week, and Rosa, one of the flower girls that Clover meets. He helped the townsfolk around Snowdon, and is spoken of approvingly in Oasis Valley. Indeed, even in his most tense relationship he was respected. Starlo never liked Chujin much, probably partly because of their wildly divergent opinions on human culture, and partly because Starlo was jealous and sullen that Soroba had ended up with Chujin instead of with him. But even he confesses that he appreciated how Chujin made life better for everyone. If we're asking what kind of a monster Chujin was, this is the universal testimony we find in-game. However, perhaps the most significant manifestation of Chujin's kindness was in his relationships with his wife and daughter. Chujin was clearly a family man, as you'd expect from somebody with a drawer full of home movies in his office. The fact that he put so much of his wealth into their family estate shows the importance that Chujin placed upon this identity. Indeed, all three Ketsukanes are portrayed as bearing a strong and positive collective identity as a family. This is obvious even if we missed the subtle detail of this photo having them all face in the same direction as do their talk sprites. We get to hear quite a lot about Chujin from Soroba, and, for all the complications there which we'll get to eventually, she makes clear how good he was to her and to their family. We only have to listen to the tale of his garden, this reflection of his own soul, to see that. On another occasion, Soroba lovingly recounts the story of how they first met, and how his caring nature was demonstrated to her even at that most early stage. These tales illuminate the sort of husband Chujin was, committed and caring. And as for his daughter Kanako, I propose that his love for her is so crucially important that we must appreciate it if we are to understand his character at all. Chujin cared so much for Kanako. He hand-carved a bed especially for her, and he programmed a video game for her to play. He hung up her drawing of him, unflattering as it may have been, in his office, right where he could see it while working. And it's clear that Kanako, in her turn, adored Chujin. Though she may have worn her hair up to imitate her mother, Soroba reckons that her smile and abilities were like her father's. It's noted by Dina that she liked to travel around the underground, just as her father did. Perhaps she went with him on some of his hikes. In Cafe Dune, Clover finds a drawing made by Kanako, depicting herself with her precious family. Chujin's love for Kanako is almost palpable. In Martlet's diary, she records a conversation she once had with Chujin about Kanako. In it, Chujin tells her that he hopes his kindnesses, small as they may be, will one day turn out to make a better world, not only for himself or for Martlet, but for Kanako. Chujin does what he does for Kanako's sake. He's caring, as Soroba says, even to a fault. One day in Snowdon, something happened which would change the course of Chujin's life and the life of his family forever. A human had suddenly appeared and attacked Dalv, and Kanako had been right there at the scene. His beloved daughter could have been injured or possibly killed, and Chujin had not been there to protect her. Long ago, humans had waged war against the monsters and imprisoned them in the underground. Surely they had already won. But the events in Snowdon convinced Chujin that the war wasn't over. A belligerent humanity was still threatening monster kind. It was threatening those he cared about most. He had to do something to end the injustice. Thus, out of his fear for Kanako's well-being, arose a sustained and passionate hatred of humankind. Given his inability to keep Kanako safe, It's not surprising that Chujin's first proposal for saving monsterkind, Project Axis, was proposed to the Steamworks as a protection bot. This purpose can be clearly seen as Axis Model 014 introduces himself by declaring his readiness to guard and protect. Chujin envisioned a whole army of these Axis bots that would act as robotic royal guards. When Project Axis was rejected by King Asgore, Chujin was devastated, but still committed. He began research into another area, that of souls. With a fusion of a human soul and a boss monster soul, he could perhaps create a serum to make regular monsters into boss monsters like himself, and that could be their army instead. Perhaps with such an army, they'd even be strong enough to take back the surface. Certainly this was an ambitious plan, but then again, Chujin hailed from a line of ambitious monsters. Throughout the game, we get hints that the Ketsukanes were a prominent and successful family, their crest proudly displayed in the corridors of Chujin's estate, and his father, perhaps, an architect who designed the old capital city of home. Chujin's lineage meant a lot to him, and his desire to live up to it may well have fed into his grandiose plans for monsterkind's salvation. Of course, we mustn't doubt for a second that he sincerely believed that monsterkind needed saving. Again, as far as he was concerned, the war wasn't over. If the barrier was ever broken, the humans would attack in force, and an unprepared monsterkind would lose again. Conflict is guaranteed. Humans and monsters are natural enemies. The only thing that matters is preparing for the inevitable struggle. This is why Chujin disliked the Wild East so much. The town saw human culture as something fun, something to be celebrated, a distraction. Chujin did not see it that way. Humans are a serious threat. They attacked those whom Chujin loved. They want monsters to suffer. They want them to die. And Chujin hated them for it. When Martlet told Chujin that she'd signed up for the Royal Guard, his reaction may have taken her aback, but it makes perfect sense. Kanako had come so close to being in the line of fire, and now Martlet was deliberately putting herself in harm's way. Chujin was truly worried about what humanity might do to those he cared about. This is why he warned Martlet about the dangers of humans so sincerely that even though she secretly longed for peace, she made a plan for if a human did go on a rampage. Humans, Chujin had told her, were dangerous and could not be trusted. They were utterly without mercy, incapable of decency, and wholly irredeemable. This sort of language is very strong, and I would say perhaps a bit shocking. Merciless, incapable of decency. This perspective of humanity is the source of a frequent criticism of Chujin, and the pejorative often afforded to him is racist. The speedrunning community has even named the trick in which you skip most of the content relating to him as the
Racism Skip Ultra Deluxe. Yeah.
Racist is, of course, a highly charged word, and I fear that its casual use as a descriptor of Chujin has allowed many to dismiss him without regard for the nuance of his character. Such a view completely ignores all the kindness and compassion that the game tells us about, in favour of making Chujin out to be almost something of a stock villain from a children's cartoon. And just like that cartoon villain, Chujin is as irredeemable as he himself believes humans to be. Ultimately, this view says, he's just a cold, unfeeling, uncaring racist. I would argue that any way of thinking about Chujin which is remotely like this is terribly misguided. Not only will it have to ignore, or at least severely distort, his incredible importance to Undertale Yellow's narrative, which we've already mentioned and will explore in depth very soon, but it clearly has not seen the Chujin which we find in his hidden tape. Here we see the raw emotions of a deeply conflicted individual on full display, a man who didn't intend to kill even the one who nearly attacked his beloved daughter, a person who, upon witnessing the body of the human he had inadvertently murdered, was seized with doubt and thereafter haunted by regret. We do not, that is to say, find a heartless monster. Chujin has no reason to think well of humanity and every reason not to. But that is not an excuse to go too far in the other direction and ignore Chujin's faults, for we will equally miss the point there as well. His hatred of humanity is not a small thing or dismissible as not really all that bad. It is very wrong, and anyone who thinks otherwise seriously needs to play Undertale again and think about what they're saying. Yes, Chujin is racist. This does not make him utterly evil, it makes him a person. It cannot be ignored because it is his tragic flaw. We need to be able to sympathize with Chujin because the story of his decline and death is a tragedy, and such tragedies are perfectly understandable. That, in large part, is why they are tragic. And speaking of decline, we see it all too clearly. He loses his job and he becomes paranoid. No one is taking the problem seriously except for him. The entire establishment is against him. He begins to rant about New Home and about Asgore, who rejected him, and harbours bitterness and resentment towards Alphys, the royal scientist who has the king's favour. He begins to keep records of all the monsters he's befriended, perhaps fearful for their safety. And of course, in his commitment to monsterkind's salvation, he experiments on himself and falls deathly ill because of it. As close as he has doomed himself, and he won't live to see his plan to its fulfillment. But it's too important to leave unfinished. So Chujin asks his wife, Soroba, to finish it for him. The research is complete. All she needs to do to create the serum to save the world is to take the soul of the next human to fall down, so long as they are pure of heart, and inject its essence into a boss monster. And so Chujin comes across a dilemma. With him gone, there's only one obvious candidate for who that boss monster could be, the one whom he started the entire project to protect. In his dying moments, Chujin has to choose between his plan, his dream to save all monsterkind from its certain demise, and his daughter. He chooses Kanako. In his final wish, he puts her first. The entire plan was for her sake, after all, to make a better world for her to live in safety and happiness. That was what he wanted most. And so Chujin Ketsukane passes away, and leaves behind his legacy. But what is his legacy? What are we to make of Chujin Ketsukane? Soroba was devoted to Chujin, just as he was devoted to her. Likewise, just as Chujin's work corrupted him, we see it corrupt her as well. Through her deep grief at his passing, her devotion transforms into an obsession with completing his project and fulfilling his legacy. Chujin's command was only to watch and wait for a human to fall down, but Soroba was not content with waiting. For her, the success of Chujin's project would prove to those who doubted him that he had been right, that he hadn't been a failure. So she went further, researching ways of being able to bring about his dream sooner. She was desperate to save monsterkind from its demise, because that was what Chujin had wanted most, wasn't it? We see here a critical difference between the two Ketsukanes. As we know, Chujin's reason for it all was Kanako, but we are given the impression that for Soroba, the reason for it all was not first and foremost her love for Kanako, it was her devotion to her husband's legacy. Perhaps this is why she allows herself to make such a terrible mistake. It's at this point that Clover arrives in the underground, and, knowingly or not, they find evidence of Chujin's legacy nearly everywhere they look. In the dark ruins, they meet Dalv, the monster whose only friend was Chujin, and who has given himself up to being alone since Chujin died. Through Clover's actions, Dalv learns what it's like to have a friend again, and is finally able to return to the rest of the underground. In Snowden, they meet Martlet, Chujin's protege, the one who considered him like a father to her, and who didn't know where she'd be in life without him. Clover works their way through all the puzzles that Chujin taught her how to make, and sails with her on the raft Chujin taught her how to build. And then, in the Wild East, Clover encounters Soroba, who, burdened by the weight of her failure, is burying her sorrows in the saloon. Naturally, Soroba takes an immediate interest in them. How could she not? Floundering in a sea of mistakes though she is, here, perhaps, is a ray of sunlight, a way for her to redeem both herself and her husband's legacy. So then, when the whole Wild East fiasco is over, Soroba lies to Starlo, her closest friend, and takes Clover with her into the steamworks with the ominous line, For Clover, the journey with Soroba through the steamworks is one of many questions. What is Soroba hiding from them? What happened to Kanako? What's the real purpose behind all of this? Though never specifically raised, these questions are obviously present in certain significant moments, and become more and more pressing as the pair venture deeper into the abandoned facility. And, at some point, the player should come to realize that the answer to these questions has something to do with Chujin. But, even if we missed the subtlety of this connection, we needn't worry. His robot makes it obvious. The fact that Axis Model 014 is Chujin's creation clearly preoccupies Saroba quite a bit. Despite the fact that he tries to capture them throughout the entire Steamworks, he is unable to bring herself to destroy him because he represents proof that Chujin wasn't a failure. So, she and Clover work out a different solution, a rather amusing reflection of the way in which Chujin and Saroba first met. It's interesting to note here how Axis is redeemed by giving him a new purpose beyond just capturing humans. As he is about to exit the story, Axis pauses, and we are left with one final reminder of Chujin's kindness. This line rather powerfully sets the stage for the upcoming revelation, and, after that, the last confrontation. At this last scene, I think it's important that we understand that this confrontation between Martlet, Starlo and Saroba, which frames the final battle and thus the climax of all of Undertale Yellow, is really over one very simple question. The question we've been asking this entire time, in fact: what is Chujin's legacy? Saroba is convinced that she knows what Chujin's legacy really is. Martlet rebukes her, reminding her of how her version of Chujin's legacy has gone against what Chujin wanted. Saroba angrily dismisses her. She didn't know Chujin like Saroba did. Starlo backs Martlet up. Chujin was kind, he would never have done this to Kanako. Saroba shuts them both up. Chujin's plan is too important. This is what he wanted. And anyway, this is for Kanako's sake, isn't it? Martlet tries to escape with Clover. Starlo tries to stop Saroba, but she knocks them both down. It's just her and Clover now. And no matter her opinion of them, she knows what she has to do. She has already gone too far, sacrificed too much, and there's nothing left for her but this. This is how it must be, because there can be no reconciliation between humans and monsters. The battle is fierce, with neither side willing to yield. Saroba is absolutely devoted to Chujin's vision. She needs to save monster kind. She needs to prove that her husband wasn't a failure. The struggle between her and Clover is representative of the struggle between monsters and humans as a whole. As she fights to take Clover's human soul, Saroba is fighting for Chujin's legacy. But as the battle grows fiercer and fiercer, the mask begins to break. Saroba claims to fight for Chujin's legacy, but is this really the monster that he was? She claims it's for Kanako's good, but is this idea of Kanako's good what Chujin had in mind? As we relive with Saroba just how terrible her version of Chujin's legacy has become, she grows increasingly desperate. But in the end, the mask breaks, and her whole life comes crashing down around her. Saroba is finally forced to recognize the extent of her failure. All that she's done is hurt people. And it's all been for nothing. In the end, the humans have won again. But Clover is given a choice. To understand this choice, we need to understand Clover's defining character trait: justice. Justice is another theme of importance to the story of Undertale Yellow. Clover fell into the underground to bring justice to the fallen humans, and their interactions with monsters throughout the game can be seen as judgments. Justice serves as part of the context of the entire narrative. This is an observation that many other people have already made, but it's important to understand it now because justice isn't only a concern of Clover's. Justice was also important to Chujin. He only says it once, but the logic of justice animated his entire project. Monster kind was unjustly oppressed by humanity, and this could only end once humanity had been defeated because they were the inevitable, merciless enemies of monsters. And there is a version of Clover like that, a version of Clover who single-mindedly pursues their twisted quest for justice through pitiless vengeance against the monsters for their crimes against humanity. This Clover fundamentally agrees with Chujin that monsters and humans can only be enemies. This Clover shows Saroba that Chujin was right, and that humans just want to dominate and destroy. This Clover makes Martlet regret that she ever doubted Chujin, who insisted that humans are dangerous and cannot be trusted. In the genocide route, Clover proves that Chujin was not mistaken in his plan to defend monster kind against a merciless humanity. But this isn't that Clover. This Clover has subverted everything that made Chujin's plan necessary. They have responded with mercy, not violence, when attacked. They have shown decency to the monsters of the underground. They have demonstrated that they can, in fact, be trusted. Martlet notes this on the roof of underground apartments. Despite their humanity, Clover is one of the kindest souls she's ever met, and she knew Chujin. Chujin's project depended on the firm conviction that all humanity is utterly irredeemable, totally irreconcilable, and that the war between them cannot be ended. And Clover has the chance to prove that he was mistaken. Of course, there's still a choice to be made. Clover can choose to kill Soroba for what she's done. It's a just judgment, as even Starlo admits. But no matter how just it may be, it doesn't fix anything. It only leads to a sad and broken outcome. Clover is driven to confront Asgore, and Martlet naively believes that things can be different. But as both Asgore and Clover know, and as Chujin knew, it can't be different. Asgore shows Clover the souls of the 5 humans whom they set out to find, whom he has killed, and Clover pulls a gun on him. Through this decision, conflict is guaranteed. This is how it must be. But Clover can make a better choice. They can prove that Chujin was mistaken. But if Chujin was wrong about humans, then his plan to save monster kind is worthless. And if that is so, then what is Chujin's legacy? Well, funnily enough, for all our searching for answers, we don't really need to look far. Martlet tells it to us as clear as we could hope for. Chujin's legacy is what we have been told about him since the very beginning, that he was kind to everyone. That he was a friend to Dalv, a mentor to Martlet, and a husband to Soroba. That he loved his daughter Kanako so very much. Though he was terribly mistaken about humans, and though that mistake cost him and his loved ones dearly, this isn't what he is to be remembered for. He is the one who cared. And as it becomes clear that Clover cannot stay in the underground, they reflect on this. Clover had come on a mission to confront Asgore and bring justice to the fallen humans. But as they think back upon their journey, they conclude that it is the monsters that are the real victims of injustice, just as Chujin said. Clover's original mission has been flipped on its head. But whereas Chujin worked himself to death, convinced that humans and monsters were certain enemies, Clover, thinking back upon all the friends that they've made, realizes that it doesn't have to be that way. There is a better way to bring justice. Clover's friends initially reject their offer, but Chujin's wife understands. Clover can't stay, and they have the right to choose the way they want to go. And they want their passing to be in the service of something bigger than themselves, just as Chujin did. Like him, they want their sacrifice to be for the future of humans and monsters. This is why, when they die, it's in a place which is the mirror image of Chujin's own grave. There are a lot of similarities between the two at this point. In their own ways, they both left legacies that wouldn't be forgotten. But though both sacrifices were intended to bring justice for monster kind, Clover's justice was different. It was a justice which believed not in vengeance, but in reconciliation beyond the barrier. This, then, is what we are to make of Chujin Ketsukane. It's a rather different, more complex portrait than I believe is usually encountered, and one which is much more important to the story as well. Of course, I'm certain that it's not a perfect portrait. There are things that could be improved, but I'm confident that the overall impression that emerges is faithful to the text. As I've studied the man himself in order to create this portrait, I found myself to have developed a greater appreciation of him and the way that he is written. Undertale Yellow has its problems, certainly compared to the work which inspired it, but I believe Chujin to be one of its best elements, and I hope that I've managed to convince at least a few people of that fact. In many ways, he stands out as a very unique character. The importance of his legacy, which I've tried so hard to accentuate in this video, I found to be a fascinating study of narrative. He relates to all the main actors of the story in different ways, and his love for Kanako, even to a fault, is an especially powerful story. And yet, when it comes down to it, Chujin is really just a flawed person who is redeemed. That's also true of Axis, his creation, and Soroba, his wife. Isn't it true of nearly everyone in these games? In this regard, he's not totally unique after all. he's perfectly understandable because he's perfectly Undertale. Of course, the difference here is that he's redeemed posthumously, because he's already passed away by the events of the game. And I suppose it's open and valid for anyone to say that redeeming someone's legacy isn't the same as redeeming that person. Chujin still died committed to his flawed and racist project. But I think, were Chujin still here at the end, he would agree with his own redemption. But don't take my word for it. Just listen to this excerpt from the developer's first anniversary livestream.
Also, I am just going to talk about it now because there's actually a really cool Easter egg that people missed and nobody has found even after searching in the Chujin tape, not the Chujin tape, but the Chujin fun value. When the audio plays, it plays a very low distorted version of the "I Miss You" sound font from Earthbound, implying that however he is, if it be Chujin ghost or a spirit of some sort, he has some sort of happenstance and missing of his family and regrets and stuff that he did.
The story of Chujin Ketsukane is a tragic one, not least because he died before it was ever resolved. But Undertale is all about change for the better, responding to bad situations by working for good outcomes. Ultimately, both Chujin and Clover died for the sake of those they cared for, and in the hope that, one day, someone else would have the determination to make their dream a reality. Thanks for watching.